do have any issues with that, please feel free to message me or DM me. Email or DM is fine. Okay, so getting into it, just today, what we'll be discussing is giving a little bit of an intro for MLab for those of you who's maybe first time it is joining the call. We wrote an end of year letter as well, just kind of recapping 2023 and previewing 2024. So want to go over some highlights from that. And then the main kind of purpose of this call is to introduce our Internet Quality Barometer project, which is thanks to an Internet Society Foundation grant, research grant, that we're able to pursue this question of how should internet quality be defined. So the majority of the conversation or of the call will be a conversation around that. And I just will take a brief moment to introduce the project and kind of our goals with it, but then start getting your insights from there. And okay, so for those of you who are not familiar, MLab was founded in 2008. We are, I'm hearing someone not on mute, if I can get everyone to mute. Yeah. And I'm gonna go ahead. Okay, thank you. Founded in 2008, we are an open internet measurement platform and research consortium, and we are invested in the improvement of the internet in the public interest. That is why we do what we do. It's why we measure the internet. We collect and publish over 4 million tests per day and publish them for open access. And our goal there is to help inform policy, advocacy, research, and industry and other interested parties on how the internet is evolving and performing over time. As part of that, or as with that data that we publish, there are applications in internet freedom, censorship measurement, digital divide, advocacy, broadband mapping, and more. And that is something that we're always interested in hearing from you all and other applications of the data. So if there's something that's not listed there, or even if there's something regarding that we maybe haven't talked about, we'd love to hear about it. And we are a fiscally sponsored project of Code for Science and Society, so hence the logos. So as I mentioned, and it's linked in the slides as well, but let me pop a link in the chat. We published an end of year letter, just kind of recapping some of the highlights from the year, and just wanted to summarize some of them if of interest for folks attending. So we published 3 new data sets to BigQuery in 2023, including Wiki, Reverse Traceroute, and Cloudflare speed test and AIM data. I know some of you have already dug into that, which is great. And just wanting to do more of that in 2024 as well. We also expanded the virtual presence of the platform and developed MSAC, which is a tool for prototyping throughput performance measurements. May be interesting to folks here. It allows for the configurability of different congestion control algorithms, as well as the number of streams that a throughput test can run. You can kind of think of it as configurable NDT. In fact, MSAC stands for Measurement Swiss Army Knife, because we want it to be able to do a number of different things. And we also began new partnerships with Cloudflare, as mentioned, and Dioptra. And we hosted these community calls and got to meet a lot of you at different internet measurement and network research and other convenings and gatherings throughout the year. So those were some highlights of the past year. Looking forward, we're increasing the number of virtual sites and soliciting diversifications of cloud providers. So we want to be able to measure more of the cloud. We're also pursuing more client integration partnerships so we can collect more data. And a big theme of this year as well will be contributing or making it easier to contribute infrastructure to the MLab platform. You know, as mentioned, we've been around for since 2008. And in that time, we've been able to work with a number of infrastructure partners, but sometimes we have run into limitations with what kinds of networks and hardware that we can be working with. And so we're just trying to make that process a lot easier such that we can continue to measure the internet as widely as possible. We're also interested in enabling calibrated measurements by increasing the number of client vantage points. So that gets into the client integration partnerships, and then redefining internet quality. So that is the topic of today. And I think actually, you know, the calibrated measurements goes into the quality discussion as well, in terms of how do we want to be collecting internet quality data. We're also interested in building out our research and technical advisory committee. You know, we're, as proven by a number of you here, we're very influenced and informed by a lot of the people that come to these calls. and we want to create more governance structures and advisory structures that reflect all of the things that we learn from you and all of the input that we get, which really does help inform our work. Any questions before I move on? Cool. As noted and linked in the slides, oh, I went to the beginning. You can read the full letter on our blog, and there's a lot more detail than I just got into. Okay, so getting into kind of the bulk of today, as I mentioned, we were awarded an ISOC Foundation research grant, which is really exciting. It's a chance to basically ask a lot of the questions that we have when we're doing this work. You know, a lot of the work just goes into collecting the data and publishing it. But then there's, of course, the question, what are we measuring and why? And is that the right thing to be measuring, which is something that we pride ourselves in asking, but this grant now gives us kind of the, foundation and resources to be able to actively pursue that question in conversation with others. So the kind of basis of this research and where we're coming from as a very foundational, sort of simple question or approach is this recognition of the momentum in the space, meaning within broadband mapping conversations, digital divide conversations, network measurement, network research, academic papers, kind of anywhere you look, you can find people sort of coming to a consensus that high-speed internet is not the only way to look at quality internet. So another kind of easy way to say it is you can have a really high-speed connection, meaning you can get a good, in quotes, score on or results on a speed test and still find that you have issues with your internet connection. And we see this in aggregate as well when policymakers and decision makers are trying to assess the quality of a region and seeing fairly high speed test results or just seeing, results that should suggest that maybe there aren't issues, but constituents and users and just people are reporting that they're having an entirely different experience that is felt on the ground. So there's this growing understanding that there is a dissonance between the concept of quality and the concept of speed. And, of course, we say this as someone who is producing speed tests at a very high volume. This is something that we know that there needs to be more thought on, and that there is actually. That's also part of the recognition of this work is that or the reason that we're pursuing this work is realizing that there are a lot of efforts out there currently to try and provide more nuance and more granularity into the way that we think about quality internet and wanting to see that work and put it into a format that can be actually used and made actionable by decision makers such as policymakers or even internet governance organizations. So that's kind of the I don't know if ethos is the right word, but the starting principle of the project. And then of course, though, as I said, there's a lot of work here, but the question inevitably when we say, okay, it's not high speed internet, then what do we mean when we say quality? And furthermore, as an internet measurement group, we're of course interested in not only how you define it, but how do you measure it, or how do you define it in a measurable way? So I would say this is sort of the core question of the work is if not speed, then what? And what do we mean by quality and how do we measure it? So that's the general prompt for the work. Getting a little bit more specific, we're also particularly interested in saying, okay, if we want decision makers to make data-driven decisions about improving the quality of the internet, what metrics should they be using to do so? And we can, there's probably going to be an evolution of how we even ask this question, but essentially, right now it's a very common practice to be using speed tests, and of course there are many different kinds of speed tests. Speed itself is a ill-defined measurement, but in any case, the general or the common sort of language of internet quality within the policy and decision-making space does tend to center around speed, and there's been a lot of efforts to add to it over the years, but we're interested in thinking about giving policymakers and high-level decision makers, people who are not in the weeds of network research every day, a framework to use that can be globally recognized. So digging even more specifically into our research statement, we want to attempt to create, define, and implement a global scoring system for internet quality to enable coordination of corporate actors, governments, intergovernmental organizations, and more towards a common vision for connecting everyone to a quality internet connection that users can trust and use to meaningfully achieve the needed services. So, of course, there's a lot of words in there, but this is really thinking about how do we provide a framework that means something across several different disciplines and expertise or areas of expertise and creates a more global, more shared understanding of what internet quality means, because it right now at the present moment, speed actually is sort of doing that, but there are better ways to define that and then also make that understandable so that, again, it can be actionable. Because if we make a bunch of metrics that only engineers or network operators use, that doesn't do as much as it could if that was a communicable metric across every discipline. So the specifics are that we're working with a research grant from Internet Society Foundation, as I've said, and you can read more about that program on their website. And yes, the recording will be made available. So just digging into our research questions, we're wanting to start from a place too, our general understanding is that policymakers and advocates currently understand internet quality through the lens of speed, but there are other metrics, and other just frameworks that they're using that we want to be able to more fully understand, create an inventory of how are decision makers thinking about internet quality and globally. So admittedly, because we are a US-based team with many collaborators globally, we tend to think very heavily in terms of the FCC and NTIA. And so this is a chance to expand and say, what are the patterns globally in terms of considering internet quality? There's also the question of just what current tools and data sets are out there. By no means do we need to start with them to backwards engineer, or make the research around only what's existing, but we do want to have a sense of what is out there, what can we be learning from the successes and the next steps of existing data and tools. And then just kind of, again, this core question, what should a globally recognized rubric for internet quality include? There's a lot of different efforts and papers and research being done for specific parts of this, but if we want to tie it all together, what should be in there? And how can internet quality be measured using open data and methodologies? A core part of this is not just thinking about what are the metrics, but how can they be collected and published in a sustainable and privacy safe way. So this is a big question, of course, but part of it that we do think there should be an element of openness or a principle of openness when making public interest decisions. So our objectives are to improve these methodologies for the measurement of internet quality. A big part of this is also understanding where investments could occur. That is often what speed test data is used for, and just generally internet quality data, and wanting to understand how we can, what data can make better recommendations. Also improving communication between internet stakeholders. There are often big parts of projects that are difficult because we have different understandings of what quality or speed or give any given metric means. So the goal of creating a rubric is to be able to have a more common shared language for what these terms mean and how we define success with them. And then as a result of all of this, we also hope to improve public literacy about internet quality. Again, a lot of, the kind of basic understandings of how people access the internet is through the concept of speed. And so we're hoping by producing more conversations, resources, and just general awareness of concepts beyond speed, that through that we'll be able to increase public literacy as well. So who will benefit from this project, and also who will we collaborate with to make sure that it is useful? Decision makers seeking to prioritize large level investments. I put country level there. I think I maybe mean regional. Advocates representing individuals who don't have access to quality internet. So basically people, advocating on behalf of individuals in, a given community. Internet researchers whose work emphasizes public interest impact. If there are researchers, as we know there are, who care about their work having uh, relevance and applicability to work in policy. Our hope is that this will provide a framework to know what that looks like and how they can be involved more directly in making and helping inform those decisions. And then also just users, people like you and I who use the internet and want to have a way to assess not only am I getting a high throughput, but also are there things that are going to affect my video calls, my ability to remote work, and so on. So that's the broad overview of the project. The biggest thing to say too is that we think of ourselves as a leader and convener of this kind of research, but not an individual contributor, which is why we are having this call, the first of hopefully many or more. We need the feedback and expertise of others to make our outputs meaningful. So while we are convening this research and heavily investing our time in it and want to, shepherd it through to something actionable and useful, this is something that will, if done right, reflect the opinions of many versus just our own. Any clarifying questions that I can answer before we move into the discussion? Okay, so I'm going to drop the notes doc in here just to give a preview of the questions. That was not the nice shiny bit.ly link, but it still works. And these are just the questions that we're going to be posing if you're the kind of person who wants to, sort of think about them before. I certainly am as well. And they're, by no means we have to get it all out today. And we might have conflicting opinions, which is great. We're just making note of them. We are in listening mode and wanting to just start getting a start to where the research should begin and what it should include. So no need to, have kind of a fully formed thought. Anything is good. Stream of consciousness is good. We're just looking for a starting place. And I know some of you have already been thinking about this, which we really appreciate. So I guess I'm wanting to start with a kind of where we started the conversation about the project to begin with. If not speed, then what? Which is not a very scientific question, but is maybe where we can begin, and maybe more formally, what questions should the IQB be able to answer about internet quality? What kinds of well, I'll just leave it at that. What questions should the IQB, meaning Internet Quality Barometer, be able to answer about internet quality? And for discussion, if you can just use the raise hand button, and I'll call on you. And Jason, perhaps since you put you did pre-homework, if you would want to share any thoughts that come to mind with this first question.
Sure. Thanks. And I pasted in the chat a link to my pre-work that I did in advance of the call. And my view is that we should really start from what are the questions that we're trying to answer, or the community, depending upon the audience, is trying to answer, rather than from the perspective of what data is available, and then try to sort of force that, by backing into the question. And there are a whole wide variety of things, from capacity to latency or responsiveness, routing impairment and loss outages. So I think there's a really wide range of things that are interesting questions to answer, to try to answer. And then once we sort of get consensus on that, then you can go to is there an existing tool that matches that, or does something new need to be created? So I think those are the initial comments, and folks can read my GitHub doc if they like.
Yeah, and I was curious looking over the doc. Thank you again for spending the time on it. Were the metrics that you listed, the questions that you listed, from just your own interest, or was that coming from, any existing lists or existing conversations?
Well, I think in many cases they're from my own interests and sort of experience. I mean, I think we're certainly all familiar with things like broadband capacity, aka speed, and that's done on a per user or per ISP sort of basis, or per tier basis. That's sort of the FCC's MBA program. May it rest in peace. Latency or responsiveness, I think, is sort of the new frontier of end user quality, so that's important. And of course, connection impairment. I mean, that's really a user type of thing. They're often running a speed test because they're trying to sort out why isn't something working correctly. Things like route impairment go to routing security and RPKI kind of things. Outages, I think that's something that the FCC's expressed an interest in recently. That came up in one of the recent NOIs, I think, about taking the existing outage reporting system, NORS and DERS, and applying that to broadband. So I think that's got some applicability there. And obviously, UCLA with Down Detector and others, that's certainly popular from an end user standpoint, to try to, determine those things. And then the rest, goes to some of the things that have come up over time in net neutrality kinds of contexts. And then other, things that I think are just generally interesting, like the volume of and share of encrypted traffic growth over time, and how does traffic change? What does it look like when there's like a big game download or there's a big streaming event, and these kind of things that are just, I think, interesting on a country level basis.
Thanks a lot. Bjorn, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, first, thanks for putting this together. This seems like a very interesting effort. I have lots of opinions, but I'd like to start with sort of an insight that I find very useful for framing these kinds of questions, which is that end users want applications to work well. And then it's sort of trickles down from there to, well, how do you measure that? And obviously the internet consists of very many interlocking parts, and therefore it's important that measurements can be done end to end or close to end, but that it's also possible to split them up into pieces so that you can say this piece of the network contributed this amount, this piece of the network contributed that amount to failures of the applications, if you like, or yeah. So yeah, I think having that sort of application point of view as a frame, and then looking for metrics and methods that compose so that you can do this splitting up into pieces, I think is a really, really good way to frame this.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, not to put you on the spot, but I know you've put work into the quality of outcome metric. I don't know if you wanted to speak more to that and what that measures and what parts of it you feel are important to include in this.
Well, sure. So the quality of outcome stuff is a way to compare network measurements to application requirements, because different applications have different needs. And if that fits into this project, we would be happy to work with you and contribute that from that point of view. That metric is based on the quality attenuation or QE, or the quality attenuation metric, which was developed in the QED project in the Broadband Forum. And that is, without going into all the details of how that works, it's a way of measuring network quality in terms of latency and packet loss in a way that composes. So you can do this end to end. You can do the splitting up. You can measure different segments and add them together to get a reasonable estimate of the end to end. And so it's, yeah, I find that to be one of the more convincing and sort of generally useful approaches that I've seen to this problem.
Great, and I have a follow-up there, but let's go to Udit Paul and then come back.
Yeah, so the list that Jason shared was really interesting, and it's obviously very extensive. One thing I would like to focus on as well is the content, right? Like, where is the content that people mostly consume? What sort of popular applications people usually consume, and what is the measurement like when you initiate a sort of like when you're trying to measure internet performance from the end user to one of these popular content hubs? I think like given the share of traffic different types of applications consume, we probably need to focus our measurement towards that as well, so that we are not just measuring towards servers that are within our network for most times, or just paths that are rarely traversed by popular applications and whatnot. So I think content, and also then you come into all sorts of things like interconnections and whatnot, which could be great in a country like the US, but it probably is not the case for a lot of other countries, right? So that's where, when you are trying to build this core, it's important to figure out how to account for things like that in terms of what you're measuring and in terms of what contributes to a country or a region having a lower score compared to another.
Right. Yeah. And that's something I also wanted to mention is I think, I mentioned the word globally relevant standard or something like that, but I think it is a necessary question to think about where will the standards need to be adjusted, or what should we consider per region in terms of, again, the interconnection in the US is going to be different than in another country. So how should that affect how we think about measuring quality, and how can that be done in a more systemized way? The other thing I wanted to pull upon was Bjorn, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is quality of outcome a browser-based measurement as well, like our speed test as well?
Yes, we do have a browser extension for Chrome
Okay.
that does the measurements, but they can have to be done from the browser, but they can be.
Yeah, well, so I just wanted to use as a starting point of what are folks' thoughts about data collection methods. So obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but MLab has a lot of experience in browser-based measurements, as well as more hardware-based. Do people have thoughts on how what different methodology should be included for data collection? And maybe I can call on Paolo as well. I see your note in the chat, and be useful to hear more from you. Paolo, if you're there, would love to hear more from you, or if anyone else wants to weigh in on browser-based tests, or just other metrics that should be included in, or concepts that should be included in internet quality. I see a hand. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Just, comment, there's one area of research would be the relation between what we could call subjective quality of experience for various applications and objective measures of quality, such as latency, performance, etc. That it's, in a sense, what is important in terms of these measures, in terms of actually how the people experiencing it. The point you made, in the beginning of your presentation about that all the objective measures appear good, but the user says, "I'm not satisfied." Why is that? What actually are the measures that correlate to the quality of experience? And doing research and so on, so that we can come up with the right measures, right objective measures, as an important area that really has not been well explored. And we're not just looking at the application need in terms of the objective things of an application, but actually how the user perceives that. And that really is kind of an open area that has not really been well explored. Thank you much.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think this is partially where we get into, again, questions around data collection. Something that MLab has explored is being able to deploy a survey alongside a test, such that you're getting the user's information, on a, as you said, objective, from an objective standpoint, as well as how it just feels to them, and being able to correlate between that. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's absolutely important to include. David, I saw your hand, I think.
Yeah, I put it up and then sort of reconsidered, but I think one of the two, I think what Peter had just said is making sure that, as we're publishing or exposing the barometer scores, that we're doing so in such a way that they're actionable, and that, whatever we're presenting to the various audiences is not so highly aggregated or so highly rolled up that I don't know what action I can take as a provider, as an end user, as somebody else who's interested in this, to improve the quality of my connection. is it that I need to buy a higher speed connection? Is it that I need to do something to reduce my latency? Is it that I need to use a different meeting app, not Google Meet, not Zoom, because my connectivity to one versus the other? There's should I be poking at my provider to have better peering with a Cloudflare or an Akamai or a Zoom or somebody? So making sure that just again making sure that what we're presenting is actionable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And anyone else on that? And just to say, I guess another one of the questions that we had was just thoughts around format. So I put in the speaker notes actually, links to the freedom and what is it? I'm blanking now that I'm talking about it. Freedom House Index, and then Internet Society has the Internet Resilience Index, and another conversations people have brought up, things like air quality measurements or credit scores, these other frameworks for just thinking that people are familiar with and that are kind of high level, but then seemingly, try and provide ways to address them in some of those cases. But just other question here is, what ways to communicate these metrics that can be understood and then also actionable, which I think is the tension. It's something else we're thinking about to finish that thought. I saw, that was David, your hand. Is that an old hand?
No, so new one. So
go ahead.
I just saw what Jason posted about the Wi-Fi, the LAN and internet access component, and I think he's obviously absolutely right there. I think that that is something that people often don't realize has such a big impact on their internet connectivity, the quality of the internet connectivity. If but how do from the measurements from a web browser, how do you tell them, well, if you take your laptop and you move it next to the Wi-Fi router, you'll see much better results, or if you move it to a different room or things like that. The other thing that I was going to note as well, which I don't know that we've talked about, but it has come up in some of the Cloudflare speed discussions at least, is that there are some measurement types or metrics, I think is my understanding at least, that are not things that are not measurable through a web browser, through a web-based approach, that you really need sort of more of a command line or native app to be able to get access to whatever those particular metrics are.
Yeah, so the flexibility or ability to do both sounds or more than one sounds right there. Holger?
Hello. My name is Holger. I'm with Nictor PR from Brazil. My question is regarding the scope. When we talk about quality, is it only in the sense of performance or also security? Because no doubt today security for end users, well, there are very many levels of security, so many levels that impact, but some are tied to the network or to the action of the internet provider. And there are even initiatives like the Secure Routing Manifesto and already measurements and metrics collection efforts. So would this be in the scope that you think about for the barometer?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's a funny answer. Our question is sort of your question as well, in terms of, is that something that other experts think that should be included? I mean, Jason earlier mentioned the outages becoming a recent interest of the FCC. What's interesting is that, there are outages as well in other regions of the world that are, less about reliability and more about political activity. And that's something that, MLab is also involved in conversations around. So should, for example, shutdowns be included in an internet quality measurement is something that, or index or barometer, is also a question of ours. I think it's something I think is very much something that we should consider, but just to say, and mostly the way that people tend to talk about quality does tend to be more performance based, but I think that's something that we're wanting to open up is, should it should it consider more than that? I'm not sure if your hand is new. Go ahead. Go ahead.
My opinion on this is like, if I understand quality as in the sense of maturity, like how mature is the internet in a country, in a region, I think security would be part of this, and it would be like to promote improvement of security by the way various stakeholders that can act on that. I think would be a desired outcome of the barometer, like to just push in this direction. Like there would be it would be possible to do measurements, like for example, does the internet provider filter spoofed packages? So this would be something maybe on the scope of traditional internet measurements, but there are also security issues you can demand from the provider that are on another level. For example, do they sign their BGP routes? Do they? This also contributes to the internet. So if we decide that security is a part, the barometer, it would be necessary to discuss where should be the bounds, because it's a very large topic. In the sense of maturity, for example, in Brazil, the local regulator is right now terminating a regulation that requires certification or security certification of customer provisioned equipment, CPEs, because this is traditionally a weak point, like the CPEs are compromised and explored for attacks. So they realize that as a regulator, they are in a position to push this in Brazil, to just require that equipments purchased by licensed internet providers, they comply to certain security rules. This is something difficult to measure. It's something that can be researched and be observed if some country, some place of regulation has something, some politics in place. But I think it's also something that relates to maturity of the internet, and especially if your point of view is global and you compare regions and countries, I think it would be interesting to look at this so that these initiatives are promoted and spread over new regions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll probably have follow-up questions for you. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, just another area of importance is instrumentation that allows segmentation of where the issues are, and being able to distinguish between problems that are due to the, let's say, Wi-Fi LAN in the home, the broadband access, the backhaul network, et cetera, et cetera. That's an important issue. That, where really is the problem in having in our measurements? The other issue is pervasiveness. That is the current philosophy that one can do it by tests that may be done by a user. They have a problem and they request a test, or they have a dongle or whatever. It's problematic. Really have to move toward ways of getting pervasive measurements. The information does exist, is collected in various ways, it can be collected. But currently, the view of measurements are, the user stimulates, and therefore you can't get statistically valid. You don't really know what's going on because you have a biased sample. So two issues. One is, how do we segment the problem, and how do we get measurements that are statistically valid across the entire internet going forward as important questions to research and answer.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And I hear the point of being able to segment where the issue is across the chat and other people's comments, Bjorn's earlier. Thank you. Sasha, I wanted to also give you a chance to speak to some of the points that you shared earlier and kind of building off of Jason's earlier as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so, a very brief history. When we created Measurement Lab, it was almost by accident. We'd been in discussion with the FCC over what became sort of the National Broadband Map and Measuring Broadband America, and discussing kind of what scientific best practices look like in this space. The FCC was like, we want to use that, but nothing like exists to support the kind of scale that we're looking for. So MLab was originally created as a prototype, as an open, extensible platform with open data requirements and peer-reviewed methodologies and et cetera, to demonstrate what that would look like. And I bring that up because I feel that there is a heterodoxy amongst us in terms of what we should be attending to and what is, the different components that are most useful for the kinds of questions we want to answer. Where I think there is, I hope at least, universal agreement, a consensus, is that the scientific process writ large, we're all for, and that having open methodologies, peer review, understanding the pros and cons, the Faustian bargains, if you will, of any particular measurement or instantiation of suite of measurements, that be known. And for my part, I am, immovable on this notion that we should be using science, we should be understanding the pros and cons of different options we might be making available. And this stands in the US context in marked differentiation from what our federal regulators have done. And my hope is that places like New Zealand or Brazil or elsewhere might, be the vanguards to show us how to do this right. In the meantime, I feel like there are real opportunities, and the ISOC grant for MLab is a great opportunity as well to kind of proof out what this should look like, what using science, how that should be operationalized and utilized to bolster our understanding of the internet, to better inform key decision makers, which was our original mission here, and frankly to empower the consumers that are often struggling to understand what they just bought or why what they just bought is not working when it comes to their broadband communication. So stepping back off the soapbox, my hope is that we don't get stuck in the differences of opinion, but we actually can focus on these common grounds, if you will, that I think are very strong amongst us.
Thanks, Sasha. So yeah, hearing that process is kind of can be also the emphasis of what we're looking at here, how we make these decisions. Paolo and Steve Song, I'm seeing an interesting conversation around formats of indexes. Is that something maybe, Steve? I think your point is interesting. Would you want to speak more to that?
Sure. Only that, there have been a lot of internet indexes produced. Facebook partnered with The Economist to produce an internet index. Huawei's produced one, the ITU's produced one. All of these composite indexes represent kind of the interests of the stakeholders involved. And so I'm a little leery of any ranking scheme that attempts to, declare a kind of, best practice in terms of weighting one variable over another, rather than focusing on trying to identify what are the most important variables to measure and to do them and to measure them well, and then allow people who create composite indexes to do it more as a local thing, right? Perhaps on a national basis, or that so that the context can be better represented.
Yeah, definitely hear you on there's a lot of existing indexes. That's something that we actually kind of wanted, that's part of the research, as I mentioned, is seeing like what is out there and what are, to your point, what interests are they representing, and what are the takeaways from them, and how can maybe we use them to make sense of things, or maybe, build upon what they didn't get right, and things like that. So thank you for bringing up the existing work. And I think I'm hearing in both what you and Sasha said is, looking at what are the essentials from all the differences in opinion or different approaches, what are the things that are common to all of them. I wanted to also get more information from, or just hear more from Leighton Olson regarding the building block characteristics, which is not a, oh, I see, building block characteristics for internet capacity and use in every K-12, et cetera. Would you mind speaking more to that? And that was for Leighton. I see you
Hello,
are. Go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
based on about 25 years as an advocate in working with decision makers and leadership of communities, what I find might be a good way to engage all parties in what is internet quality is to find some things in common, such as local school areas, towns, counties, community college areas, which are defined in data terms as digital economy areas. And those are also overlapping multi-utility areas, which include power, communication, utilities, and then perhaps work with the FCC requirements for reporting twice a year on the map updates, but also then include updates on outreach, BEAD, digital equity, whatever is there. What's going to be that locality's area for looking at for the next 6 months? And then, in effect, anyone from a real first timer to mid-size to expert could come in. And those are perhaps universities or other community university partnerships might work with one or more of those community college areas and help design the the data tracking and the reporting, and including going back for the visual tool development with the regional planning agencies, and in effect helping look at broadband is good for X, Y, or Z. Again, going back to the FCC National Broadband Plan of 2010 and the 7 national needs for broadband, starting with health, education, jobs, economy, etc. So whatever people say, what's the quality? What's the speed? What's the quality? I think it can help us look at the use. For each quadrant or quarters of the population, who uses internet for what? And if we say we're trying to assist in, say, American or any other capacity to use the internet in our world environment, then people can say, how are we doing and what are we trying to do to increase the capacity for people to have particular digital skills or to undertake usages. And that would potentially have products out there for energy cooperatives to work on family energy security, by tracking a variety of power usages, energy subsidies, or whatever the heck it might be. So that's and I would leave it to all the parties here who know the data so much better than I do. But that's a framework for trying to slow it down so that you can talk to a local alderman, or you could talk to anybody else, and to try to say, how's our local school area doing in comparison to places that may have more resources or fewer resources.
Yeah, thank you so much. All really great points, and helps to understand your comments more. So thank you. Yeah, seeing this note about the nod to BITAG and MapRG. So one of the other questions that we have is just what organizations, consortiums, and experts should be consulted. To that last point, local governments are a huge part of this work. So engaging folks on that level as well. So asking this, what organizations, consortiums, and experts should be consulted, as well as just what conversations should we be a part of. So newsletters, mailing lists, working groups, etc. Do folks have thoughts on that? We've heard BITAG and MapRG of the IRTF mentioned. Any others? Pew? Cool. I think if I'm not mistaken, someone from Pew RSVP'd. It might be you, Jeff. I'm not sure. Is someone on Pew on the call? Okay, this is also one that can be followed up on. But yeah, I mean, if you hear internet quality being spoken about, or quality of internet, or even speed or anything in this area, that is something that we want to be a part of, and if you could send our way, would be really useful. And then some of you touched on this already, but just what other questions should we be asking? What are the things that we're missing here is something that we'd like to know. Thank you for the IETF link as well. And as a final thought, if you are interested in helping shape this work, how would you like to be involved? Is an advisory committee, through a survey, a workshop? Are there other formats that would work well for you? What are the ways that would help you be engaged in this work? Maybe do with monthly calls, quarterly calls, mailing list. Do any of those options sound? Have you seen success with them in the past? Okay, well, we can follow up on that one as well. But thank you for all the contributions. We got a lot of good stuff. I got some questions around if the recording would be available. Yes, it will. And also, oh, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Kata. And also the chat will make available. We'll share a summary. We'll write a blog post of our conversation here. Thank you again. This gives us a really good starting point. And if you'd like to be involved, well, everyone here will just keep informed, as well as our mailing list. And then if you'd like to be more involved in a more active capacity, feel free to let us know. You can email hello@measurementlab.net. We have our community calls every month as well. Typically, we use them to just keep our users and community updated on evolutions on the platform and testing methodologies and things like that. So if you want to hear more about that, you can attend our monthly calls. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll keep you all updated as this work evolves.